Hello and welcome to the May 2022 edition of the Pembrokeshire Bird Diary. I'm Annie Haycock from the Pembrokeshire Bird Group, here to share some of the highlights of the month. May weather was unsettled, and despite being a degree or so warmer than average, there was only 75% of the normal sunshine and 77% of the normal rainfall. If you watched the previous diaries for 2022, you may be starting to see a pattern here. Perhaps it isn't surprising that the first stonechat fledglings were seen on the Dowrog and at Porthgyn 13 days earlier than last year. Out on the coast, some choughs were already feeding young chicks. As choughs don't breed until they're 2 to 3 years old, there can be still signs of young birds pairing up and investigating territories ready for next season. In this particular territory, up to 4 choughs have been around all spring, but none have settled to breed. These two, almost certainly males, were observed on the 4th, having a good old scrap on the coast path in South Pembs. It's probably fair to say that they are not best buddies. Fights like this, with one pinned to the ground, being pecked and prodded by the more dominant bird, are often seen in autumn. Unfortunately, they can lead to the death of a subordinate individual. It will be fascinating to see if 4 now becomes 2 and if breeding occurs next year. On Skomer, ravens were stealing guillemot eggs to feed their chicks, eggs being a highly nutritious source of food. Ravens breed early in the year, and by the time the guillemots have eggs, the young ravens are close to fledging. Fortunately, there are only a few pairs of ravens, but thousands of guillemots. Various studies out on Skocombe are giving fascinating insights into the lives of our birds. Wheatears have been subject to fairly intensive study since 2017. All the pairs should be settled in and breeding now, with no spare males or females anywhere. However, this year at least 4 males have no mates, though 2 of them are still singing on their territories, hoping for the females to return. 2022 is showing the lowest female return rate since the study started. Another ringed bird, a Manx shearwater this time, nests in Burrow 1 in the Lighthouse study plot. It has been paired with the same partner for at least 9 years and has successfully fledged a chick every year. Still on Skocombe, the first Fulmar egg was seen 5 days earlier than the 2013 to 21 mean. By the 18th of May, at least 2 puffins were delivering fish to their pufflings. These are 3 days earlier than the first of last year and 7 days earlier than the 2013 to 21 mean. Indeed, the only earlier deliveries were in 2019, when they started on the 14th. And still the migrants were coming through. This little ring plover was the 2nd of the year, but just the 19th to be recorded on Skocombe. You'd think that as they have bred as close as Carmarthenshire, that we would see a few more than just a handful across the county in most years. A subalpine warbler on Skocombe on the 17th caused some lively debate. Was it an eastern subalpine or a western? Fortunately, it was caught and ringed. Subalpine warbler has been split into 3 species, eastern, western and Maltones. This proved to be Maltones, the one with the smallest breeding range. You need a close view, a DNA sample, and or hearing the bird call to tell them apart. This was the first Maltones for Wales. The bird stayed around for 12 days, and on May the 29th a boatload of birders got a day trip to the island for this mega rarity, raising nearly £300 for the observatory in the process. And then most got a bonus Icterine warbler on the way back to the boat. As Pembrokeshire normally sees only one of these every few years, it really was a bonus. The day after the Maltones was first seen, the weather was particularly stormy, and for a 3rd year running auks were losing their eggs to the sea, with 8-metre waves washing the lower ledges. The first herring gull chicks of the year were also washed away. The stormy weather seemed to bring in a few unexpected birds. This female serin stayed around for only 30 minutes after being discovered, then flew off to the east, back towards mainland Europe where it should have been all along. There have been only 3 serins seen previously on Skocombe, with males on the 10th of June 1967, the 11th of May 1978, and a female on the 23rd of November 2003. The following day a brambling appeared. Bramblings are usually autumn and winter visitors, though there have been records into April. It should have been in Scandinavia by now. Things were then fairly quiet for the rest of the month, but ringing efforts continued. On the 27th, a female yellowhammer was caught in one of the Heligoland traps. This was the first to be seen on Skocom in 8 years. Despite the weather, or perhaps because of it, Skoma reported a redback shrike on the 18th, and then a woodchat shrike the following day. Meanwhile, back on the mainland, another woodchat shrike entertained watchers on the road to the Stacked Rocks from the 18th to the 24th. It was catching insects and impaling them on bramble thorns for later consumption. This species is now almost an annual visitor to the county. The next mega rarity appeared on the 22nd, a dark-eyed junco. It was only the second Pembrokeshire record of this North American species. But just to prove that rarities can turn up anywhere, this one was in a St. Ishmael's garden. But our breeding migrants were also showing us interesting things, such as this willow warbler that was nesting not far from a box occupied by great tits. Somehow it got its wires crossed and spent some time feeding the great tit chicks. Perhaps too much time, as its own nest, with chicks being fed by its mate, was predated a week or so later. This bird, however, continued to feed the great tit chicks, at least until they left the nest. You may remember last year's story about a pair of swans at Langham benefiting from a nesting raft provided by local people. Graham Brace reported that, back in April this year, they took up residence on the raft again and produced a clutch of 8 eggs. The pen sat diligently on these eggs for 6 weeks. 2 eggs were lost when somehow they rolled off the raft and were washed away, shortly before the remaining 6 hatched around the 22nd of May. The emergence of these 6 balls of fluff brought great joy to the folks living round the shore and to the village as a whole. The initial euphoria, however, was slightly diminished when over the next 2 days, and despite heroic efforts to save them, 2 of the cygnets perished when they became stuck in the mud around the raft at low tide. A further 2 disappeared over the next couple of days, leaving 3 who appeared to be thriving well. Then, during the night of the 30th of May, a bold and wily fox that had been seen prowling around the nearby somehow managed to wade across the mud, evade the cob and pen, and take the remaining 3 cygnets. An air of gloom and despair fell on the local community, deprived of the pleasure of watching this family thrive as they did last year. A cruel turn of events, but that's Mother Nature for you. Naturally, Mr. Fox was well recorded for his exploits. For the next few days, both the cob and pen appeared bereft and aimless, and the pen took to the raft and barely moved for 2 days. However, they did recover somewhat and were seen accepting food from humans again a few days later. On a brighter note, Dave Astin spotted this colour-marked dunlin at the Gann at the end of the month. It was tracked down to a northern Spanish scheme based at the Villa Viciosa estuary, where it was ringed on the 9th of September 2018. This relatively small estuary on the North Spanish coast is both a migration staging post and a wintering site. The dunlin was probably a passage bird. Others ringed at the site have been recorded from Iceland to Portugal. Well, that's a quick review of May. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll look out for the next edition.